Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are in the world. We are back once again on Mondays with RCI TV for a new championship, taking a mini British GT theme. Brands Hatch plays host to round six tonight, just under 4 kilometers long in length, with officially 9 turns. GT3 lap record held by Raffaele Marciello with a 1:22.557. I don't think our drivers are going to get anywhere near that tonight. I'm your lead commentator, John Dalton. Alongside me is Jesse Lee with Stewie behind the cameras, as always. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, everybody, and welcome indeed to a slightly soggy and wet Brands Hatch. Nobody is going to trouble Raffaele Marcicello. I screwed that name up. I did that last year, too. But anyway, it's going to be an interesting race, all things told. But before we can get to the race, we've got to get through qualifying in mixed conditions. It lightly sprinkled rain enough to keep the track damp in the entirety of practice. Qualifying, it appears to be raining ever so slightly harder, but that would just be my eyes playing tricks on me. It is pretty much a static weather condition. A couple of strategies for the race we'll get into just a little bit from now. The overarching sort of storyline from practice was a lot of cars out there searching for grip. John Dalton, a lot of cars missing that mark, ending up sideways, backwards into the wall, trapped in the sand, all sorts.
Yeah, precisely that, Jesse. It's going to be a very steep learning curve here tonight, especially with these conditions. They're not fully wet, but they're not fully dry either. So you've got patches of grip loss everywhere as we ride on board here at Nico Kumpu for Rebound Racing for the first lap of the qualifying session. Of course, turn one, Paddock Hill bend, needs no introduction. Very tricky corner before heading up the hill towards Druids turn two. Be sure to get your braking right here. Take the inside line because there is normally more grip on a newly paved of road in there. Coming up to turn three, of course, Graham Hill bend. Be careful on the track, on the corner exit, for track limits. Of course, very easy to run wide, but again, with the mixed conditions, I don't think too many people are going to be exercising curbs or AstroTurf. Of course, a lot of moisture is held within these. Now, turn four of 30, you've got to set yourself up for a good run down through Pilgrim's Drop, of course, up the other side of Hawthorne Hill and into Hawthorne Bend. Normally a little dab on the brakes, down one gear or so in fully dry conditions, but Nico Kumpu here going down at least 2 gears before turn 6 of Westfield. Again, very easy to pick up track limits if you do abuse the limits on the exit far too much. Up Dingledale, over the other side into Sheen Curve. Again, no exit curve here, it's pure grass, so gotta be careful you don't get caught out there before the banked left-hander of Sterling's. Crucial again to get a good run out of here. The last thing you want to do is hamper yourself down into turn 9 of Clearways and Clark Curve, where of course you set yourself up for a car coming up here inside, and that's a very easy passing place if you do allow that. Coming on to the Brabham Straight, of course, towards the start-finish line will be the first time on the board today of a 1:27.737, and nowhere near the lap record, as we said earlier, Jesse.
No, absolutely not, but these laps are representative of the conditions and what is possible. That 27.635 from Christoph Verstappen, surely the mark, and it's only fitting that early on it's Lang and Verstappen chained to the hip to each other here in the front of this field. Joachim Shelgren goes P1 for the time being at 27.585. The question will remain, the track's only damp, and will that lend itself to an improvement on the track and more grip as the session goes on? We can only wait and see. A abandonment of a lap from Martin Lawrence and the connection lost 404 car. He didn't lose connection just there. He definitely lost traction. Trying to get that car back to pit lane, though. Everybody else out on the track. 21 cars searching for grip, searching for lap time. Shelgren, Verstappen, and Lang, the top three. Boardman and Kumpu, the next couple of cars. We focus on Luca Alaska in the number 32 unnamed BMW. They are settled into 6th place. The thing that I noticed with those opening laps is a lot of them were quite conservative. Not that they weren't digging for extra speed necessarily, but they were very cautious about hitting curbs, about track limits, that sort of thing. Very fastidious, especially through Dingledale, Sheens, and Sterling's on that first lap for nearly everybody. And it shows up on the timing sheet. A lot of people quite close as Andy Boardman goes to the top.
Yeah, Andy Boardman to the top once again. Did put in a very strong practice lap. The Ferrari looks very comfortable in his hands, although Nico Kuizma beating that lap time, but only just with a 1:27.495. I'm wondering if it is going to be the case, Jesse, that the later you leave your lap in this session, of course, the drier, I say in finger quotation marks, that the circuit should in theory be. Jao Manso for the RPMS Sim Sport currently down in P20 with the last lap of a 1 minute 30. Just the sheer gap we do have here, of course, in the Split 1 Series tonight. The Porsche is probably going to be one of those cars you might want today in the wet, Jesse. Of course, the engine over the rear axle going to push the tyres into the tarmac even harder than usual. Maybe getting slightly better drive out of some of the slower corners. So out for the Porsche, of course, the other two in the field. We've got Ted Edwards and Ross Cam currently in P18 and P11 retrospectively, as Manzo goes off the road in the Porsche, just losing the rear end. Nico Kumpu still on a fast lap at the moment, looks quite good for a small improvement here. Will it be enough to take him to the top of the board as he crosses the line? It's not, but only just, Jesse. 1:27.537, very close to Nico Kuizma's time, and Andy Boardman goes to provisional pole on his last lap.
Andy Boardman, the 27.485, good enough for provisional pole. That's exactly 1/100th quicker than Kuizma was able to do, and half of a tenth quicker than Nico Kumpu. Shelgren a tenth off and in fourth place. That's how close this qualifying is. This racetrack lends itself to close qualifying no matter what the conditions are, and I would have to guess that we're going to squeeze even more cars within a few tenths of each other before we're done here. Of course, this just split 1, split 2 race is going on as well under similar conditions. And as usual here on the British Mini Championship, we will bring you the highlights of split 2 after the conclusion of split 1's race this evening. It's going to be interesting to see how they get on. About an even split for cars. We've got 20 some here. I think there's a few less in split 2, but it should be a good race nonetheless in both splits. A lot of cars abandoning their laps. I saw the 99 car do that about a lap ago. The 115 of Grim Lilith has had to reset to the pit lane. Tom Shipston's done exactly that. Roscom now back into the pit lane. All it takes, John, one corner, one mistake, and you abandon that entire lap. You don't even try to run another lap. Reset to pit lane, and you go back out there on fresh rubber in fresh conditions, because one mistake like that completely ruins your tire pressures. It ruins everything about that run, and you're forced to restart.
Yeah, precisely that, Jesse. I mean, it's tricky, isn't it, in these mixed conditions where you have a damp circuit. Of course, sometimes the dry tire is the more preferable one because there's just not enough standing water to lower the temperature of the wet tires. So you run the risk of either burning through the wets very quickly or graining a set of dries because of course they just don't get up to operating temperature. So any kind of minute slide or off-road excursion, as we see Jake Boswell there heading off the road, and we now can back into his teammate Phil Roberts, of course, two sister cars, Kaiju Racing, very similar liveries. Let's have a look. Phil Roberts up into P6 with a fantastic lap there of a 1:27.592. And McLaren's looking quite strong, although Christopher Streppen's Aston Martin at the helm of the field, followed very closely by Andy Boardman, Nico Kuizma and Nico Kumpu. And that's going to be very crucial for Christopher Streppen's championship hopes, because currently tied for first with Tobias Lang, 237 points apiece. So Verstappen's going to want to try and escape Lang as much as possible. Lang struggling at the moment down in P8. Verstappen provisionally on the front row of the grid, so he's going to want to try and capitalize on that as much as he can.
Certainly do. This is a race near the end of the championship. It could go a long way in determining who is the champion. I know we got a tie up at the top, but even if those at the front of this field have a really good day, you can make up points on some other people and get yourself in a better position, especially if those at the front of the championship have issues today. You could stand to make up a lot of points with 20-some cars. An accident here at Brands Hatch is somewhat different than most racetracks. It is so difficult to have a small accident or a small mistake or a small off here that basically by having an accident, you're sending yourself to the absolute back of the queue. And that is what is at stake today. Verstappen knows what's at stake. He's reset quick lap, a 27.432, the quickest of everybody. That was until Andy Boardman in the greased Weasel Ferrari comes to the front, and the first 26 of the day, a 26.995. Now, John, is that the track getting quicker, or is that the drivers getting more confident in these weather conditions?
I'd say more than likely it's going to be the drivers, of course. They take it easy in the first kind of couple of opening laps, find their feet, find where the grip is, and then really start pushing on to see what time they can get. And that's a very healthy time indeed from Andy Boardman. Like you say, the first driver into the 1 minute 26s. Jordan Daly currently down in P9. We're used to seeing him a lot higher up the grid, although he struggled a little bit, Jesse, with qualifying in the British GT, the mini British GT championship, should we say, and always comes through in the race. He's one of those drivers you kind of you watch and he just carves through the field and normally finds his way to the front naturally in racecraft. So interesting to see if Jordan Daly can A, improve today, or B, whether he can have a better race. Of course, last time out at Spa, it was the first of the 1 hour split race formats in combined first of the 1 hour sprint race formats with combined splits. Tobias Lang, of course, took overall victory in the pro category, with Nico Kumpu and Jordan Daly controversially close behind after their last lap scuffle, if you remember, Jesse, into the bus stop. Silver honours went to Mike Redford over Richard Hutchings, who had his season debut, and Simon Kubaki in third. And of course, the championship we touched on earlier, still very close at the top, but we'll touch on that later on as Jordan Daly has a big moment out of the last turn of Clark Curve. That's going to hamper his run to the line, and no improvement there, but only just. He's got some more time in it, but he's just got to hook a lap together, Jesse.
Yeah, he certainly does. That was a scary moment through Clark Curve that time, and that shows you just how on edge a lot of these drivers are. You got to respect the limits here in the best of conditions today, even more so. You've got greasy, wet curbs, and the grass is too hospitable either. The worst case scenario, getting out there into the dirt, of course, it'll pull you into the sand trap if you get off in Paddock Hill or Clark or any place where there is a sand trap. It will just suck you in there. So you got to be very careful about that as Velasquez goes P6 up 1 spot with a new quick lap for him, a 27.585. Good enough for that spot, just got out of the top 5. Everyone chasing Andy Boardman, a 26.995. Nobody else, quite frankly, in the same ballpark. Verstappen, the better part of half a second off. The same could be said for Shelgren and Kuisma. Everybody else scrambling for positions, but behind Andy Boardman, who is on provisional pole here, a tenth, even less than that. Most cases, half of a tenth will jump you at least 1 spot with 2 minutes left to go. Still cars going off the racetrack at this stage. The local yellow here, of course, for a car in the pit lane, so that is no bother to anyone as Jordan Daly does go through. He was 9th. He's made it all the way up to 3rd. That's a more representative lap from the Triple R driver, a 27.442.
Yeah, much more representative of the number 197 Triple R. So, yeah, perfect to see Jordan Daly provisionally on the 2nd row of the grid. Driver a little bit out of sequence that we normally see a little bit higher up as well. Jesse Martin Ulrich, of course, for the McLeod Racing Team. We saw him at the World Tour. We had a brief interview with him as well, and just looking to improve the BMW if he can. Of course, Velasquez has managed the time worthy of P7, so there's definitely pace in that BMW to get it a little bit higher. He's just got to stitch a lap together, and a couple more local yellows, and the blue dots on the track map, of course, signify drivers are yet to start another lap. So a lot of these drivers in the queue with Martin Ulrich, this will be their last shot at it. Of course, the number 256 Nico Kumpu at the head of this train. Stan van der Keulen in there as well, as Martin Ulrich crosses the line with an improvement, although not enough to push him up the order. He's going to have one more shot at it, Jesse, but I think he's just messed up Paddock Hill a little bit, so probably not going to be his best lap coming through now. It's just maybe going to drive around for a little bit more experience in these damp conditions. Christopher Streppen there, all over the grass, very well held as he dipped a left rear tire. You can just see how loose the Aston Martin is. through the corners, fighting the wheel constantly as he now comes up to what is essentially turn 9. It seems very odd that officially on the track map, Brands Hatch only has 9 turns. It's of course got a few more kinks in it, but Christopher Streppen all over the grass and gravel. That's not going to be good for overall qualifying time, but he will have another lap in the bag if he can stitch it together. Lost a lot of time on that excursion, but crossing the line with just under 10 seconds to go, and he's wide at paddock. That car looks like a right handful, Jesse, at the moment.
Yeah, it certainly does. It's surprising he's able to hang on to P2 for the time being with a car handling quite like that. So many cars in the pit lane. That's not by choice. They went off on their final qualifying lap. I saw Manso Roscom do exactly that. The 60 of Shipston, unsure if that was a retirement back to the pit lane due to the strategy that they had called for themselves or an off into Druids one way or another. Just about every car back into the pit lane now. I would say the majority of them are in the pit lane. Qualifying done and dusted for them, but there are about 5 cars who have yet to complete their final lap and are still on a valid lap. One of those, of course, is winner this season, Phil Roberts for Kaiju Racing. He's down in 8th place, would like to get a couple of spots here. I tell you what, a full 10th would get him inside the top 5. How good would it be? It's not quite a full 10th, but it is a 27-5 even for Phil Roberts, and that does jump him a couple of rows.
Yeah, a couple of rows being the crucial part, of course, Jesse. The further forward you start, the less you minimise your risk of coming into obviously the famous first corner accident, or the second corner, should we say, here at Paddock Hill, as it kind of bunches up into Druids. Final qualifying results on your screen, of course. Andy Boardman taking the pole position overall with a fantastic time. Their fastest third sector. Christopher Strappen fastest through the first sector, and then you've got to go all the way down to Luca Falasca to find the fastest middle sector for the BMW. But we've got Andy Boardman, Christopher Strappen on the front 2 rows, Jordan Daly, Shelgren, Kuizma, Roberts, Kumpu, Falasca, Tobias Lang all the way down in P9, Christopher Strappen. Bear in mind when we look at the championship results in a minute, of course, keep an eye on those two. Martin Ulrich, Stan van der Kolen in 11th, Jake Boswell 12th, Roskam in 13th, Mikov 14th, Ted Edwards in 15th, Barver 16th, Jackson 17th, Shipston in 18th. Grim Lilith, not the qualifying result I was expecting from them today, down in P19. Sven Kunas in 20th. Martin Lawrence, we spoke to him earlier. The M6 is a bit of a handful here at the best of times, let alone when you mix in a damp track. And Manzo rounds out your qualifying session for today. 22 cars to take the start, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but 22 cars at a small track such as Brands Hatch going to be a little bit chaotic. As we now take a look at your championship standings for the split one, or should we say the pro cars. Of course, Tobias Lang and Christopher Streppen joint top with 237 points apiece. Andy Boardman, of course, with a strong qualifying here, third with 202. Nico Kumpu in 4th with 184, 2 points behind Jordan Daly with 182. Martin Ulrich with 154, Nicholas Keller with 152, Nico Kuizma 145 to Thomas Erntraus 143, and then a big gap back to Shelgren with 114 points, rounding out your top 10. And moving on to page 2, Grim Lilith, of course, just outside the top 10 with 98, 1 point behind Andre Hartmann with 97. Phil Roberts with 93 after a very strong start at Alton Park. Mikov with 84. Luca Falasca with 70. Roskam with 69. Manzo on 64. Jake Boswell with 54. Martin Lawrence has managed to amass 52 in the old M6. And Les Stevenson down in 20th with 51 points. Now, moving on to page 3, Harry Conway with 46, Tom Watts on 44. The battle of the Toms here with Tom Shipston on 40, Richard Phillips on 36, Barver joint with Aaron Jackson on 22 points apiece, Sven Kunas with 15, Ted Edwards on 7, Stan van der Kolen yet to score in split 1 after, of course, a promotion from split 2. And everybody else has unfortunately signed out of the championship, including Rye Becky and a host of other drivers that will be on the next page. Now, a very fitting scene, should we say, there, Jesse, as we were going through the championship standings with the wet Brands Hatch pictures behind. very fitting to what we are today. The drivers, of course, are on the grid. This is going to be the decision we saw, of course, at Snetterton, Jesse, where some drivers elected for wets, some drivers elected for dries, but we do have a mandatory pit stop here tonight. So, had a little bit of an insight on strategy from Phil Roberts earlier on. Why don't you give us an outline on that one?
Yeah, it's quite interesting to hear what some of the drivers are talking about down into the pit lane. There's a couple of strategies you can use for today's race. The number one strategy that I think most people are probably going to go for is they're going to put on the dry Pirelli P0 tires and they're going to go the full distance here today. That shouldn't be too much of an issue today, except that grip will be at a premium if you do that. There is another strategy, and it probably will prove to be the less popular strategy, maybe in some ways a safer strategy if you have less confidence in the car, and that's to do half the race on wets, come into the pit lane, change the tires, put more wets on the car, and go to the checkered flag. Why would you do that? Well, since 1.9, tire punctures have been an issue, especially with overheating wet weather Pirelli tires. It's not so much a big deal with the dry tire, it's the same as it's ever been there, but for the wet weather tires, drivers have found out quite fast and unfortunately that the wet weather tire, if it overheats, it will melt the bead on the tire and it will cause that tire to pop, which sends you usually careening into a field, a wall, whatever nearest to you. So those are the two strategies that they could employ. I think almost everybody we're seeing is putting on the dry Pirelli tires here in the damp at Brands Hatch. You can tell the difference at home, folks, because the dry tire has the Pirelli branding on the sidewall. A wet weather tire has no branding or a black sidewall.
Yeah, of course. Most of the cars electing for the yellow sidewall tyres. A little bit of a news for those of you that are very eagle-eyed will notice there is a large barge missing from the field in the form of Martin Lawrence's M6. He's been quoted as, "Sorry, boys, bailing out from this one. I'm not going to drive this." And somebody said, "Such terrible conditions, no grip whatsoever on any tyre," to which Martin Lawrence replied, "That's an understatement with the M6, of course, with all the turbo boost that it has. It's a very tricky car at the best of times to put power down, let alone in mixed conditions on what will be essentially completely the wrong tyre for the road at the time." Drivers, of course, going off in single file for their formation lap. 20 cars now start today's race. So it's going to be nice and compact, I would say, going into Paddock Hill. It's a tricky corner at the best of times, let alone when PT drivers tend to extend it to two, sometimes even three wide before heading up the hill, the other side to Druids and bunching up into the hairpin. So 20 cars doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm sure we will still find a little bit of chaos in the field. And of course, a RCI calendar a little bit quiet this week. Of course, we have today's event, and then on Friday you will find us back on RCI TV for the Roulette Mini Championship, where of course each round you must pick a different car, and the circuit isn't revealed until closer to race day to avoid, of course, all the strong BOP picks being done. Round 3 took place at Bathurst, and suspiciously again, Benjamin Harmon, aka Stewie, the man behind the cameras, took victory with Jordan Daly in second and Stefan Kui in third, and Stewie extends his championship lead 1 point over Shelgren, I believe. So very suspicious circumstances there, Jesse. It was Stewie's idea, and Stewie's leading the championship.
I will say this, John, and I will defend Stewie on this case. There's nothing suspicious about his win at Bathurst. He qualified, I think it was second place or something like that. He ran second, and Christoph Verstappen just threw it off the road, I'm afraid, and that's what led to the change there. He definitely was a podium contender, Benjamin Highland, but ended up getting the win there. He even said post-race, I think, to us that he was probably going to end up finishing second regardless, but ended up with the W simply because of how efficient he was and how smart he was to keep the car out of the wall. It was at a premium last Friday for sure. 20 cars, mixed conditions, and you've heard everybody so far complaining about the grip. How is that possible? Well, it's quite simple. It's not quite wet enough for wet tires. It's not quite dry enough for dry tires. It is literally in the median of the two. That's why nobody has any grip. That's what's going to make this race as interesting as it possibly could be. John Dalton, Take us away.
Yeah, absolutely. 20 cars side by side, of course, down the Brabham Straight here at Brands Hatch, waiting for the green flag to go. It drops very early. You see it on the left-hand side of the gantry. Down towards Paddock Hill we go, 2 by 2. Hopefully they will stay, because 3 wide through Paddock, especially in the dry, is scary enough, let alone in these mixed conditions. Of course, a couple of cars going defensive. Looks like Nico Kuisma possibly defending from Nico Kumpu. Up into Druids they go, and getting very tight and condensed. I said it would into Druids, of course. Very slow corner. Everybody bunches up and tries to make as many advantages as they can. A little bit of a bump there. Looks like Stan van der Kolen into the back of someone. Not sure who that was. Off the grass they go, rejoining very safely indeed. It could even be Tobias Lang maybe, and if it is, that's not going to help his championship hopes, of course, with Christoph Verstappen slotting in just behind. I believe that's Mikov. It is Tobias Lang indeed in the number 94. He's already tumbled down the order. Christoph Verstappen at the head of the field behind Andy Boardman. Championship points are looking very healthy for him at the moment, as Luca Falasca closes up on Phil Roberts. Through Hawthorne Bend they go, of course, turn 5 into turn 6. This is where we saw the BMW with the fastest middle sector. Phil out wide over the curbs, lots of moisture there, struggled to put the power down, and that allows Falasca up the inside as they head down Dingledale and through Sheen Curve. Falasca can now set his sights onto the back of Nico Kuisma's McLaren ahead of him. I'm not sure if he's going to have enough pace to catch him by the end of the lap. Looks a little bit condensed at the back of the field. Ted Edwards with Grim Lilith and Aaron Jackson, of course, the Kaiju teammates, assaulting the RCI staff member up the inside into Clark Curve. Not alongside enough and not able to get the grunt of the Mercedes down. The Porsche with far superior drive off the corner, and Stan van der Kolen finds himself up into P9. The bollards in turn 1 go flying, and Martin Ulrich holds station in P10. I don't want to say it, Jesse Lee, as we see the Kaiju car of Jake Boswell up the inside of Ulrich into Druids, but it's a relatively clean lap, judging by the conditions as well.
Yeah, it's been pretty good. I believe that was Lang that you saw get removed off the racetrack as they entered Graham Hill Bend. Was able to rejoin the racetrack and get back into the race without any further harm or foul, but it was a scary moment. But it was the lone scary moment that we had at the end or in the middle of lap number 1. Phil Roberts with Falasca. I feel like Phil just went slightly wide. Falasca took exception down the inside, and Phil just decided to stay as wide as possible to not get hung up side by side. Meanwhile, this fight right here, as Vanderkula trying to get by Phil Roberts, and they brought Martin Ulrich into the fight as well. Ulrich has pulled up on the back of this battle, leaving Roscom and Boswell in the background for the time being. But the longer this battle continues here, that's going to bring this whole 6-car, 5-car train to a head to each other, and it's looking like Phil Roberts is in the lead engine here, but may not quite have the confidence or the traction as some of the other cars. As in the background, you see them all stacking up. Boswell taking advantage, trying to get by Roscom. He has the inside look into Paddock Hill Bend. Will he stay there? Yes, he will. Is he able to complete the pass? No major contact there, and you see Mikov. Mikov looking down to the inside as well. Says, I'll have one as well on Roscom. Roscom losing many spots here as Boswell gets through, and now Mikov gets through as well. Or maybe that's Lang, in fact.
Yeah, Tobias Lang on the comeback, of course, up the inside of Roscam on that one. Let's have a race replay here of the, this is the incident, I believe, with Tobias Lang getting bumped in the back by Stan van der Kolen, and goes off to driver's right, way up the embankment of Graham Hill, back into the escape road, essentially into pit lane before rejoining.
That's not easy to do, John. There's a huge bump out there.
There's a nasty bump out there, and especially in wet grass, it's not good. As we see Nico Kumpu here with Shelgren getting hassled down into Paddock Hill. Shelgren looks around the outside, but nothing to be done there either, and Nico Kumpu stays ahead of Shelgren, the Swede, of course, in the Volvo-esque livery McLaren that we finally have on your screens this week, which is fantastic to see. Another Kaiju Super Tourer themed livery, as Phil Roberts still coming under pressure from the Dutchman behind the number 475 Ferrari. Phil is currently the cork in the bottle, should we say, Jesse Lee. Look to your track map on the right hand side. You've got the leaders streaking away. Of course, Andy Boardman is ahead of Christopher Streppen, 1.4 seconds to the good. Another 2 seconds back, you see Jordan Daly, and then just under a second brings with him Nico Kumpu and Shelgren as well. And that little train got a bit of a gap back to essentially Phil Roberts that we're riding on board with here through Paddock Hill up to Druid. Stan van der Kolen
Oh,
up
it's
the
a big
inside,
move!
very late break, chops across the front of Phil Roberts, and that sends Phil wide, and that now opens him up to his teammate, of course, Jake Boswell and Martin Ulrich there, and nearly Kaiju friendly fire going into Graham Hill there. Jake Boswell possibly not quite alert as he should be, and Phil Roberts' confidence is going to be suffering that little bit after the bump and run from Stan van der Kolen. Of course, Martin Ulrich finds his way past, and we've now got the Kaiju cars fighting for overall position. Ulrich over the curb and sideways allows Stan van der Kolen to come through, and this brings with him Tobias Lang, and meanwhile Ross Cam has just sat at the back of the train, Jesse Lee, with first class tickets.
Yeah, this is absolutely brilliant. It's going to come to contact here between these two, Martin Ulrich, and are they going to get it settled? They're trying to run defensive lines through the Minter Straight before they get to Westfield, and that almost came to tears, but somehow they all maintained and were able to stay on the racetrack, but only just. Jake Boswell had some heads-up driving there that time through Druids, realized that it was going to be contact, that it was going to be a wide maneuver for the top two. Oh no, and the BMW's gone. Martin Ulrich has either spun or been spun off of Sterling's. What happened there?
Yeah, let's have a look. Of course, Stan van der Kolen behind him at the moment, coming into the bank corner of Sterling's, and maybe a little rub from Stan van der Kolen sends Martin Ulrich onto the inside wall. Of course, nose will impact. That BMW is going to be suffering with heavy front aero damage, and of course the pit window, Jesse Lee, isn't open yet, so Ulrich's going to have to suffer that one out for a few more laps before it does. I believe it's a half-an-hour pit window tonight, and of course the only rule stipulation is to add 1 litre of fuel. Of course, tyres completely up to the drivers whether or not they'll elect to take another set of dry tyres or not, or maybe switch to the wets if the track does get any wetter. But for the moment, Andy Boardman out front, Christoph Verstappen in second, Jordan Daly third, Shelgren fourth, Nico Koizma in fifth, followed by Nico Kumpu in sixth. Falaska, Boswell, Roberts and Lang round out your top 10. And, you know, just a few kind of corners of fighting essentially brought the next train into the line nearly, Jesse. Of course, you've got Mikov with Lilith, Edwards and Jackson close behind, and they pretty much caught up to the back of Roskam, who was of course at the back of the train holding back, maybe being a little bit reserved in case contact like that did happen. And of course Roskam can then find his way through and filter through the chaos as Ted Edwards gets very close over the top of Sheen Curve and into Sterling's, but Grim Lilith's Mercedes with a grunt just to be able to gap it before the next corner in the braking zone.
Last time we saw this, Grim was still behind Ted Edwards. Grim able to work his way around Edwards here for the 14th place spot. But Ted, for Race Ventura, hasn't fallen off the back of Grim simply because he's got Mikov and the group that you just mentioned that they had caught up to all in a line. So Ted looking for lines, looking for a way to maybe get back by Lilith. Hasn't been able to do that necessarily as they all end up line astern through Druids this time. And something we saw from that front splitter cam from the Race Ventura Porsche, every single car leaving these corners is a little bit sideways. They're having to counter steer just a little bit as they are venturing over the curbs just a little bit. All of those little movements, those extra movements that you do, that slows you down, but they're necessary to make sure the car stays in line. Everybody fighting a different kind of handling issue, and I would assume that's manufacturer based most of the time. But even still, they're all fighting handling issues. They're just not the same ones. Some of these cars twitch off some corners, some off of others, some leaving the corner, some entering the corner. It's what you get with all these different manufacturers in play. Some cars too, and I noticed this with the Phil Roberts race earlier on, whenever he was battling, he was going wide off of nearly every corner. Some of the other cars actually had a little bit more grip as Ted Edwards is gone. That's exactly what I was talking about. Into the corner, the Porsche didn't like it. It lost complete traction into Sterling's that time, and it's going to cost him a spot. Jackson is through.
Yeah, of course, all the weight over the rear axle in that Porsche, and sometimes you upset the balance of the car and the rear will overtake the front. of course, and that's allowed Aaron Jackson in the Kaiju car up into P15, Ted Edwards down into P16. You see him already sliding through Paddock Hill Bend. You see Aaron Jackson sliding in the mid to corner exit, and it's exactly what you just spoke about there. Drivers, of course, fighting different issues at different parts of the corners, and Sven Kunas has been fighting something through Paddock Hill. He was on the back of the Ted Edwards fight. Let's see what happened. Gets it over the curb in the compression and just has no grip on the painted surface. Spins to the inside. Luckily, keeps it out of the wall, manages to avoid Tom Shipston, does a bit of a pirouette, and of course Martin Ulrich goes through, and Sven Kunas will join the back of the train, but very well held there to keep it out of the wall, but just on the painted surface in the compression, just not the one there. And right on board now with Tobias Lanning, trying to turn the start around, of course, from the impact earlier on with Stan van der Kolen, which sent him wide, and see Phil Roberts there wrestling the car off the corner.
Remember
it looks like
I said
Tobias
he was
Lang.
going wide?
Absolutely so. Phil Roberts is using every inch of the track tonight. I mean, we paid for it, so he might as well be using it. But these McLarens are very understeery, Jesse, going into the corners. And Phil Roberts looks very understeery in and oversteery out. So possibly a little bit of a difference in setup between the limitless speed drivers and the Kaiju cars here tonight.
Certainly is. And some of that, again, manufacturer based, some of that's probably set up as well. Phil Roberts finding it really difficult to guard the inside of these corners, which is why he's given up several of these positions early on. And just fighting a handling issue with the car. Tobias Lang for the limitless speed car, not necessarily back here by design. Of course, the contact with Vanderpool earlier on, and you can just see how wicked that Kaiju 225 McLaren is. There is something handling wise very much wrong with that car, almost certainly down to the weather conditions. Goes wide again, unable to brake and turn into the corner. That allows the limitless speed driver's car to come down the inside, and that will be an easy enough pass for Lang in the 94. Ted Edwards has re-entered the track and has got by Jackson because Jackson's made an issue, and then Ted Edwards immediately bottles it, throws it off the road, loses 2 more spots. That started with Jackson going off the road. It was looking like an easy overtake for Ted Edwards, and then Ted Edwards can't break it up into the corner and goes off himself. My word.
Yeah, just getting a word from Stewie here that apparently maybe contact between Ted Edwards and Jackson, and that's why we saw Ted Edwards going straight on. Not sure if we're going to see a replay. We are from a different point of view here. This time a frontal-facing TV cam. They rubbed, didn't they, door to wheel, and that's why Ted Edwards went off to driver's left. Aaron Jackson, of course, goes through, and Ted Edwards shuffles himself back down the order, finds himself all the way down now in P18
something's happened to Daly.
Porsche. But Daly as well, yeah, well spotted, Jesse. He's dropped behind now. This is Falaska ahead of him. Daly was way up inside the top 3 or 4, and he's now got to find his way past this giant BMW that's in his way. And no contact reported on our broadcasting / stewarding tool, Jesse. So possibly Daly dropped it all on his own.
I mean, it's super possible, John. This racetrack right now, it's exactly like the drivers reported earlier in the paddock. It's a racetrack that doesn't matter what tire you're on, it's not going to have any grip in it because of the sort of intermediate wetness and dryness of the racetrack. It's neither here nor there is what we would call it, and it's such a dangerous affair, a racetrack like this, because there's no right or wrong answer. It's all about driving and how well you drive, and this is going to go really wrong here as contact with Falaska. Daly was down the inside, even in the best of conditions. That is a scary proposition, and it hasn't turned out well for Falaska or Daly. Might I say, though, it looks like Daly's had the worst of it. Oh, and he's spinning onto the racetrack. He's trying to get the car going back the right way, but instead, because of the wet track, he spun it completely round. And dare I say, that will be the end of the race for Jordan Daly. He's had enough.
Yeah, Jordan Daly calling it quits there. I mean, tried to get it spun back around the right way, Jesse, but of course the TC override essentially kicking in and turning itself off to try and, get the car going again. Of course, when he was already facing the right way, it just means more wheel spin backwards where he went. And, of course, pulling the garage door down on tonight's efforts. Meanwhile, Luca Falaska finds himself all the way down now into P10. He's lost a heap of time and a few positions to boot as well. So he's going to be fired up trying to get that BMW back up to where it once was. Like you say, Jesse, it was an ambitious move, I think, even in the dry. You've really got to have 2 drivers willing to work together, and just having a snout of the McLaren up the inside of the BMW. Falaska, I assume, just didn't realize that Daly had already made the move and attempted the move, should should we say, of course, in these damp conditions. Brought a little bit of the painted surface in the grass on the inside, and that unfortunately just pushed Daly wide into Velasquez's rear quarter. Round went Velasquez, and of course round went Daly as well. And Velasquez with big oversteer at the end of the straight managed to keep it. Not sure if he dipped a wheel in the grass, but that's now going to open himself up to Roskam in the Porsche behind, coming up the inside of Sheen curve. Roskam with the nose up the inside. He's going to hold it there all the way through Dingledale up towards the top of the hill, but Velasquez around the outside, across the grass he goes. And I said it earlier, Jesse, there's no curb out there. Straight into the grass Velasquez goes. Mikov gains the position alongside Roskam, and Velasquez's day goes from bad to worse.
The cambered nature of the corner as well just pulls you off of the racetrack. If you get up on that shelf, if you will, if you get out of the camber of the racetrack, that will certainly happen to you. It's something all the drivers know all too well, but you've got to push it. You've got to use every square millimeter of the racetrack for grip purposes and also for speed preservation. The pit window open 30 minutes. They have to come down pit lane and satisfy the minimum pit requirements. A lot of drivers not necessarily worried about that right now. One driver that is Martin Ulrich, who has been sent to the rear anyway. They will be the first on pit road, already running in 18th. Ted Edwards making a move on the Ground Zero racing car of Tom Shipston up a place, and now will reset their sights on Jackson in front. Battles all over the place. No battle up at the front of this field. Andy Boardman has led all of the laps thus far and enjoys a 3-second lead on Christoph Verstappen right now. As it would stand going into the final couple of races of the season, if the results hold, Verstappen would be your championship leader. So we'll see. Matter of fact, let me make sure I'm right about that before I say yes, indeed. Back up what I say. But Andy Boardman would certainly, with winning this race, close in on that championship fight. It could be a day that we remember, the day that the 69 got themselves back into this thing, especially late in the season. That is hugely beneficial. What's happened here? Shelgren, is this going to be a pass a little bit off the racetrack? Nothing too crazy from the 747, and Shelgren's going to make this pass for P2. I wonder if there was an incident prior to that that led to them closing in as much as they did, because they're side by side here for P2, and now all that does, a pass being made, not quite, by Shelgren there.
Yeah, it looks like Christopher Verstappen just dropped the wheel.
Oh, but
on
he has
the
done it now,
outside of
apparently.
Sterling's. Yeah, it just looks like he dropped the wheel on the outside of Sterling's turn 8. Detriment of this run, we said it in qualifying, got to get a good run out of turn 8 down to turn 9, and unfortunately Verstappen didn't. Allowed Shelgren alongside through Clearways and Clark Curve, and then down the Brabham Straight. Shelgren's McLaren just had the better exit from turn 9 to pass Verstappen by the time they got to Paddock Hill. Verstappen, of course, down to P3 now. Shelgren up into P2. He can set his eyes on catching Andy Boardman, and this could be a complete kind of turn of events if Shelgren catches Boardman and shuffles him down into P2. That's going to lose Boardman some championship points, but hopefully Verstappen can find the focus again and get the Aston Martin back closer to Shelgren and find his way down the inside, although Nico Kuzma behind looking very racy as well, just 1.4 seconds to the good at the moment, so we'll have to keep an eye on that fight to see what happens. Christoph Verstappen, meanwhile, in P3. Phil Roberts now having a tussle with Tobias Lang, and Lang calls it there and says, you know what, I'm taking my mandatory pit stop. I want nothing more to do with this. Phil Roberts around the outside of Sterling's, it looked like. Tobias Lang over the curb, and Phil Roberts just got the much better run down again into Clearways. It's almost a one-to-one of what we saw earlier with Verstappen and Shelgren. And Phil Roberts around the outside, although Tobias Lang, of course, surrendering it for his mandatory pit stop. So Sterling's is the corner, Jesse Lee, where you hook too much outside curb and you're going to get passed down into Clark Curve turn 9.
Yeah, it sure is. Sterling's is also a corner where you can set somebody up through Clearways and Clark's. So that's also a really good place. It's not necessarily the best place to pass. So many times we see accidents happen in that corner. In fact, we've already seen that happen here today as Jackson gets completely sideways through Graham Hill, and it's going to be contact between those two drivers. That is interesting. That is Race Ventura on Kaiju here, and Ted Edwards taking exception, trying to go up the outside of Surtees. It hasn't worked, and Aaron Jackson will hang on to that spot, but that will have frustrated Ted Edwards there. Jackson making the mistake, allowing them to get side by side, and then Edwards somewhat being run out of room just a little bit. Jackson defending quite heavily indeed. 3 cars have completed their pit stops: Lang, Shipston, and Ulrich. Ulrich, of course, was a little bit off the pace. And speaking of off, Aaron Jackson has been off the racetrack again. That car also having the handling characteristics of going wide in some of these corners. Talked about some of these cars not able to turn down to the inside and some turning too well. You saw Ted Edwards. Remember, he went off in Sterling's a few laps ago. He nearly did it again. Oh, Phil Roberts is backwards for Kaiju. Was it contact? Nobody around him. Does he get too much curb and Clark? You bet he does. And he hits the inside wall. Cars scattering, trying to avoid the stricken Kaiju car. That's such an unfortunate accident that saw him wreck into Clark and hit into the inside wall. That is exactly what this racetrack will do to you. Just one tire off of the racetrack, John.
Yeah, it's not like these modern day circuits we have nowadays, of course, where you go beyond the white line and there's more tarmac, you know, such as Paul Ricard, for example. This is a traditional, very old school circuit where you cross the white line. You've got, of course, grass and gravel, and at the worst, you've got, of course, AstroTurf, as we see Ted Edwards with a big sideways moment through what is essentially turn 4 of Surtees before heading out into the Pilgrim's Drop, essentially back straight, should we say, in finger quotation marks. So everybody having handling issues, but I think Phil just dabbled with the white line a little bit too much, dropped the wheel into the wet grass, and unfortunately round he went and found contact with the pit wall on the inside, and Stan van der Kolen did very well to avoid, and all the other cars hopefully coming along after should have seen the stricken yellow and blue Kaiju car sat in the middle of the road. So very heads up driving from Phil to get it kind of spun back round and on the way again without collecting anybody else. So kudos to Phil on that one, as the battle between Aaron Jackson and Ted Edwards still rages on. Of course, the Kaiju on Race Ventura outfits, and looks like the turn-in for Jackson is far superior than Ted Edwards, but then the Mercedes just gets a much better run off the corner as well. So Ted's going to find this one very hard to catch, I think, Jesse Lee. The Porsche doesn't look too stable on corner entry, and it definitely isn't using the traction coming out of the corner either. So a bit of a stalemate fight, this one.
I would say quite the opposite of that, John. I think that Jackson's car doesn't have turn-in grip, but Edwards has all the grip exiting the corner, which is why he's getting loose on some of these corners. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Completely sideways from Jackson there. Edwards able to turn down under him. They did this 2 laps ago, and it was contact. It won't be here. Jackson is not in a position to defend, so he will not. He's going to try and get the crossover move here, and he just about gets it done, and his turnabout fair play. Ted Edwards squeezing Jackson a little bit. Jackson a little bit more grunt down the straight here and through Pilgrim's Drop. He's going to somehow retake it, and oh my goodness, Verstappen has gone off the road out of 3rd place. He's down into 6th or 7th now. What has happened to Christoph Verstappen as they come through the middle sector? Is this a Westfield issue? Nothing happening there.
Sterling's, yeah, Sterling's again. We said it earlier. Skates up the bank and just can't get it turned in over the curb, and of course no grip. The car possibly even up on 3 wheels there. Jesse managed to get it turned around facing the right way, but it just proves how tricky it is, of course, that Christoph Verstappen can drop it essentially all on his own. You know, he's, I would say, confidently one of the most experienced drivers in the field at the moment, and even he's finding trouble at the moment with the Aston Martin.
Well, you know, I like to do maths, and I have been doing the maths, as you would assume. At this rate, Andy Boardman might come from 3rd place to be your championship leader. That is, of course, unless Verstappen is able to climb back inside the top 5 and start picking up some more points. But a scary, slow spin for Christoph Verstappen. Luckily had a big enough gap. Nobody was immediately around him. Such a slow, agonizing spin out of Sterling's, able to get it back together, and only fell down to 6th place. But what damage has that done to the tires? I've already told you what damage it's done to the points championship. It is going to be very, very close.
Sorry, Andy Boardman, I think, will probably be, like you say, Jesse, maybe the championship leader going into the final round, and of course remaining in just outside the top 3 all season long to come and swoop it at the end. Could be a comeback story of the century, possibly. Aaron Jackson is back behind Ted Edwards now. This fight is back and forth all the time, and Phil Roberts is just behind Aaron Jackson as well. If you look in the mirror, you can see a little yellow and blue dot. That's Phil Roberts' McLaren after his spin through the last turn of turn 9. And just look at the wheel effort on that Mercedes. He's dabbling the opposite lock as he slides through Clark curve to try and get the grunt of the Mercedes down. And just look at the gap he's pulling on Ted Edwards, of course, up into the first turn. Both drivers got to get it stopped. Ted Edwards very sideways on entry. Aaron Jackson sideways on exit as they head up the hill now towards Druids. And Aaron Jackson trying to get the car in a bit wider than Ted and almost swoop around and put the power down that little bit earlier, but just nothing to be had at the moment. And this is going to be going on for a little while as we see Jackson over the AstroTurf, of course, trying to put the power of the Mercedes down on that wet surface isn't going to be all too pretty. And we saw it last time, Jackson with a fantastic run out of Surtees, down towards Hawthorne Bend, but this time not having any of it. It looks like Phil Roberts is closing. All the meanwhile, maybe the Kaiju cars can work together. Just look at the grunt that the Mercedes has, Jesse. It just pulls up in a straight line.
Yeah, it does pull up. And quite interestingly about that is I don't know if the Mercedes has this grunt at many other racetracks. It used to be a formidable car in a straight line, but I haven't seen it pull up like that in a very long time. So I wonder if maybe that's just the BOP at Brands Hatch or tracks like it. But that is incredible to see just how much straight line pace that car actually has. We saw it whenever he did the crossover move, did Jackson on Edwards a few laps ago. This time by, though, it's going to be Ted Edwards coming down into the pit lane to the attention of his team for his mandatory stop. He'll be only the 4th driver to do their stop. I think most may be waiting to the halfway point. Some could be waiting as long as possible. News from the front of the field. Remember, Shelgren made the pass on Verstappen before Verstappen's incident, and then Shelgren took the Speed Juice fastest lap of the race award from Andy Boardman. Was closing in. It was under 3 seconds, Shelgren to Boardman, and now back over that 3-second barrier, 3.1 seconds to gap, first and second. But prior to that, Shelgren did erase the better part of a second of that gap. So pay close attention to that. We continue to go on. The fastest car may be running down Boardman here late in the race. It could possibly happen. Nico Kuizma, by the way, inherits P3. It is right in front of this man, Nico Kumpu, for Rebound Racing. P3 up for grabs all of a sudden. Kumpu thought maybe they were racing for 5th or 4th place. They have a podium on their hands right here if they can make this pass.
Yeah, say battle of the Nicos. You know, we had the battle of the Toms earlier on in the championship, but now it comes down to the battle of the Nicos on circuit. Of course, Guizma and Kumpu, as we now see Mikov and Roskam follow each other into the pit lane. And the only problem doing that is, of course, if your opponent ahead of you isn't as confident coming into the lane as you are, of course, hitting the pit speed limiter in time, it could cost yourself quite a bit if you do decide to follow somebody in. Grim Lilith, of course, soaring at the wheel through Paddock Hill Bend as the 115 comes up to the top of the hill at Druids. They do stay out and inherit 8th place from the 2 cars that have just come down the lane. Tobias Lang is currently your lead driver, shall we say, on the pit lane race. He's already done his mandatory stop and, of course, is currently down in P12, trying to shove in some laps to gain some time back from the earlier incident. Andy Boardman, your race leader, though, out front, 3.6 seconds to the goodies, answered back to Shelgren. Shelgren, of course, hitting the fastest lap of the race, and Andy Boardman saying, you know what, I will have some of that, and let's see what I can do. I'm going to keep pushing and go from there. Boardman, coming around the last turn, does decide to stay out for another lap, of course. Just under 17 minutes to go on the pit window, and if you're new to watching ACC and you're wondering how we keep track of who's pitted and who hasn't, look to the left hand side of your screen. Anybody, of course, with the orange number 1 next to their name is still yet to meet the pit stop requirements, and anybody with a green box has met the requirements and is free to go. And of course, the requirements tonight is only a litre of fuel to be added, tyre choice completely up to the drivers, and I don't think we're going to see too many tyre changes here tonight, Jesse.
No, I don't think so. One car that could have used some tire changes was Jordan Daly's car. Came to chat to explain the plight of the driver tonight. Too much spinning of the tires and ruined it at that point. It's time to pull the garage door down. Realized there was no real path back from an accident like that, despite the fact not hitting anything or nobody hitting him. It's just the ruining of the tires. There was no way back from it, and that is the name of the game. Taking care of the tires, keeping it going the correct way seems to be one of the tallest tasks tonight. Normally, the tires, once you get your tire pressures set, is the least of your worries in a 1 hour race. But in a mixed condition race like today, it is ultimately important. Keeping it on the island and facing the right way is half the battle. You hear old racing drivers, John, all the time talk about, well, back in our day, we used to race the racetrack. We weren't actually racing our competitors, we were racing the racetrack. You don't see that much anymore. You are genuinely racing competitors most of the time, trying to outfox, outsmart, and outplay other drivers. Today, though, is one of those days that old school skill set comes into play because you are more than anything racing this racetrack.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's very tricky indeed in every single section as Nico Kumpu goes for a move around the outside of Nico Koizma into Paddock Hill Bend, continues it up to the top of Druid, still on the outside, of course, track bending to the right. And Nico Kumpu's managed to do it around the outside in Paddock Hill in damp conditions. That's a fantastic piece of driving, and you just said it there, Jesse. You know, skill comes into it on days like today. You're no longer, racing everybody on an equal platform. Everybody's got a slightly different car underneath. They've edged for a slightly different setup, which of course will give them very different results through the corners. And Nico Koizma now down into P4. Nico Kumpu promotes himself up onto the bottom step of the podium, and just been doing some little bit of digging on a few of the cars at the front. Andy Boardman, Shelgren, and both the Nicos elected for wet tyres at the start of the race, Jesse, and probably why they have streaked out so far on their competitors in the race. And just speaking to Stewie behind the scenes as well, apparently the wet tyres can really take some abuse in 1.9. You saw there Nico Kumpu pulling over on the Pilgrim's drop part to try and find some standing water, maybe to try and get some heat off those Pirellis. As we go to a race replay here of Martin Ulrich and Roscam. This is through the last turn, I believe, Clark Curve, as they come round. Ulrich very wide indeed. Roscam gets the much tighter line, much better drive off the corner. Down Brabham Straight has the inside line for Paddock Hill Bend. Last of the late break as the Porsche stands on the brakes so much later than Ulrich can do, and he manages to draw it up in time, and that promotes Roscam up into P15. Ulrich, meanwhile, down the order into P16, and meanwhile, Shelgren on the lane, Jesse, and they look like some yellow wool tyres I'm seeing.
That is quite interesting. A tire change here. Remember, not a mandatory tire change in today's race. So this is an elected tire change, which will add about 29-ish, 30 seconds onto their pit timer. That's very interesting, assuming that the dry tire is the right tire. But I will say, being devil's advocate, every car that we've seen have any sort of dramas today has been on that dry tire. The wet tires, the leading four cars, all of them were on wet. So why you would change now? They must know something we don't, or they must think there might be an advantage in doing so at this time. Also, too, that wasn't necessarily a strategy that we were presented with. We were presented with changing the wets to keep the tires from blowing, and that makes me wonder, will Boardman, Kumpu, Koizma, do they think there is a chance that their tires will overheat and blow, as Koizma's tires are a lot more upset than they were a lap ago? And this is going to be a huge slide, I would have to imagine. Too much over the curb. It bottoms out the back of the car. It undulates, and he makes it all the way to the inside wall. That is a long slide, but it's a common one, but minimal damage, all things told. The biggest damage done was to their position as they come into the pit lane.
Yeah, Koizma down the lane now, and probably rightfully so, on that call of the spin, especially if they've been in the wall. Maybe get some aero damage fixed. We know how sensitive the McLaren can be when it does have diffuser or splitter damage. All the grip in it is essentially aero-based rather than mechanical, and especially in the pre-Evo version, I've been at the wrath of that many a time before. It's not nice to drive once you do get some aero damage on the car. Andy Boardman still out front this time now, though. 8.9 seconds to the good on the last time by the timing board. Andy Boardman with a fantastic slide through there as we see a race replay.
Take a look at this.
Let's have a look at the steering inputs. He comes through Hawthorne Bend, of course, down the little straight between the two corners. Into Westfield he goes, tips it in over the curve and straightens out the wheel when he's turning left when he should be turning right, Jesse. Fantastic car control there.
I think his left rear tire is, as they say in the business, cooked, is what's going on there. That is every bit a left rear tire cooked, and that is what you stand the risk of doing here today. Phil Roberts finally able to get by his teammate Aaron Jackson, and this team, this Kaiju team, does race each other, and they do not pull any punches. They've come to blows in this championship before. Not these two drivers necessarily, the two drivers in the team. Phil Roberts' car doesn't look too planted, all things told. It has been all over the place since the drop of the green flag. Not saying Aaron Jackson's is much better. It's just off and sideways in a completely different manner. The two different driving styles, two different setups perhaps, and well, for the teammates, but at least able to facilitate the pass here, and they will continue on. Phil Roberts up to P5 for the time being as Vander Kula does come into the pit lane, and I will address, or we'll say, at the top 3 or 4 cars, Jake Boswell in P3 for the time being as well. Kept themselves clean, kept themselves out of it. They stand to get a top 5 when the dust settles here tonight.
Yeah, I think that's all you've really got to do here, Jesse, isn't it? Is just keep your car pointing the right way and keep yourself out of anybody else's trouble that you may come across as well. And if Jake Boswell's done exactly that, like you say, he could be seeing a very impressive result indeed for the Kaiju team. And you said it earlier, didn't you? The Kaiju car's not afraid to fight each other. And we did see a little bit of friendly fire at Donington down into the Melbourne hairpin just a few rounds ago. So if Aaron Jackson thinks he's got pace over Phil Roberts, he might, go for the move on him and if he can progress himself up as your race leader does come down the pit lane as well, followed by Nico Kumpu. So that could promote Jake Boswell provisionally to first place.
It could for the time being. What I'm quite curious about is what does Boardman and Kumpu do? And these are the pit stops that have occurred thus far. And anything north of about 40 seconds is going to be a tire change. So these pit stops that are around 1 minute in time, that is a tire change. Shelgren, we know, put new tires on the car, put dry tires on the car, in fact. So that is a 58-second stop. That's about average. Bekov with 37 and Vander Kula with 38, especially Tom Shipston with 31 seconds. I don't think that's a tire change. Those are just different fuel loads there that are different times. But Nico Kuizma has taken tires. Grib Lilith did not. Roscom has taken tires. Ulrich, I don't know. Maybe. That seems a little quick for a tire stop. Maybe he didn't. But Ted Edwards, certainly the long stop as well. And Andy Boardman has come out of the pit lane, 32 seconds. No tire change there. That was only fuel. And keep in mind, that's not time sat in the box. That is time end to end on pit lane. So as soon as you come in and break the timing beam to the time where you exit and break that beam, that is the length of the time the timer is running, not just the time sedentary in the box. So Boardman in and out, no tire change there. They are going to let it ride to the end of the race, despite the fact that the slipping and sliding seems to be getting worse on the wet tires. And other cars, we saw Lang as well on dry, or excuse me, not necessarily on dry tires, but did not change tires on that stop.
Yeah, just want to touch on Ulrich's pit stop as well, being a 48 seconds. You see Christoph Verstappen very sideways indeed. Over the grass he goes, and that allows Tobias Lang to escape. Let's have a look what happened here through the middle sector, through the Dingledale section, essentially up the top of the hill, into curve, and he's already sideways, caught the grass on entry, and we saw Phil Roberts do it, but on exit earlier on. And that is how he found himself into the pit wall. Just want to touch on Ulrich's stop, of course, being a 49-second stop. Of course, he did nose the car into the wall earlier on, Jesse. I would say that's probably for damage with a little bit of a fuel stop as well.
Very, very smartly put, John. I had forgotten about the incident that led to that. We love having the driver's perspective, especially during the race, to sort of give us a better context of what's going on out there. Jordan Daly had to retire from the race, but says wet tires is absolutely the way to go in this situation. Even with getting your pressures right with dry tires, you just don't have the grip, and you're going to be about a second slower than anyone else. And I wonder what that will mean for Shelgren, who has come out behind Jake Boswell. He's looking to make the pass, of course. Boswell's completed their stop, but Shelgren with new dry tires is those dry or wet tires? Those are wet tires on Shelgren's car, aren't they? I can't quite see the sidewall, but never mind. Shelgren has made the pass back up into what is just about fourth place for the time being. So Jake Boswell coming through the field, still looking like a top five, as Yao Manso for RPMS has just had an absolute bear of a weekend so far. And another issue here, this time in Paddock Hill Bend. Never mind the rearview mirror that is live as watching a replay. That is not the rearview mirror as he would have seen it. As you can see, two different parts of the racetrack. And here it is in one sector. He got through Druids and he's off again. Something very much amiss on that Porsche.
Yeah, Manzo maybe just kind of, a lapse of concentration in Paddock Hill, and the rear's gone away from him. He's managed to keep it out of the wall and keep it on the black stuff, keep going, and then dip the wheel as he came out of Druids into Graham Hill, and that's, of course, sent him off into the scenery as well. So, it's one of those things as a racing driver, once you make a mistake, you've really got to pull yourself together. Otherwise, you do risk making another mistake, and that's exactly what Manzo's done, as we now see a bit of Porsche on Porsche action. Ted Edwards, of course, on the outside of turn 9. Manzo on the inside, although the position is going to switch, of course. Not a lot of grip anywhere at the moment here at Brands Hatch, especially through Clark Curve, of course, with the odd nature that the circuit kind of ebbs and flows. Nico Kuizma currently has overtaken Stan van der Kolen in the last sector, as the Ferrari is now down in P10. Nico Kuizma up into P9. He's going to try and make amends for his mistake earlier on as well. Phil Roberts, the only car on your screen yet to stop. Everybody else has made a pit stop down pit lane, of course, just under 5 minutes to go on the pit window. So Phil is leaving it very late indeed to decide what to do with his strategy. And as soon as I say that, Jesse, it's almost like he's listening to us in the comms box. Down the lane comes Phil Roberts.
Well, you just knew what the strategy was. You two agreed mutually on the strategy. Going to come in quite late and do their stop. That will complete the cycle of pit stops. Phil Roberts will, of course, tumble down the order just a little bit, and that will reset us with the top three: Andy Boardman, Shelgren, and Jake Boswell. It has been a race to remember for the driver of the 47 for Kaiju Racing. They have driven through this field. They have not put a foot wrong. They've not made mistakes, and it has turned out to be something a bit special. Looking like a podium for the driver in his return season to sim racing. This is his first full season he's done in quite some time, John. He's had some complications, and life, of course, gets in the way. And now back to sim racing. He has not missed a beat, looking to capture another trophy here today by standing on the podium. Nice camera there. Don't know why they've never fixed that. Put a giant gantry in front of the racing action. Well, here it is, the field as they run. Verstappen, remember, after his spin was down to P6, he hasn't fallen further. In fact, he has caught Nico Kumpu here for 5th place. This could be Kumpu has passed Verstappen. So Verstappen was into 5th place. Nico Kumpu for Rebound Racing has made that pass, putting Verstappen back into 6th place where he was after the incident. And as I said earlier, if Boardman wins this race and Verstappen finishes outside the top 5, that is going to tighten this championship up. I mean, it's already dead tied, but it is going to remain a very close championship between those two.
Yeah, big wiggle there as well from Tobias Lang in the compression of Paddock Hill, and that loses a lot of momentum and allows Nico Kumpu up the inside into Druid. So once again, it puts Verstappen and Tobias Lang together on the road. So going to see if Verstappen can use the dry tyres to catch Lang, although the wet tyres certainly seems like the more favoured choice at the moment. Of course, Jordan Daly giving us a small insight into the YouTube chat about how the wet tyres are about a second a lap faster than dry tyres, because the dry tyres just don't get any heat into them. Of course, with the slight bit of standing water, the circuit isn't optimal for Pirelli dry slicks, much more towards the wet groove tyre, and we're seeing that when we see cars coming up against each other on dries and wets. The wet cars practically sails around the outside, and a mind-bending move that doesn't look natural, but of course it does in these conditions. Shelgren still in P2, although a whopping double digits now to Andy Boardman ahead. I think it was nearly 13 seconds last time by the timing gantry. Going to get an updated one here as he comes across the line. 11.2 seconds there. And looking at the pit stops, of course, the Andy Boardman 32.8 down the lane and Shelgren 58.4. So indicates that Shelgren is on a fresh set of tires, Jesse. It's going to be interesting to see, can Shelgren make up the amount of time? Of course, if you look at the last laps, Andy Boardman pootling around at 1 minute 31 and Shelgren's
He's
on a
doing what?
128.3. Shelgren is on a move to the front. Keep an eye on that, man.
Bekov off of the racetrack there in Paddock Hill. That will facilitate the move for Kuzma to get around them. And 10.3 seconds the gap, and several seconds quicker. Boardman on old wet tires, Shelgren on new wet tires, and that is going to be the difference. Does he have enough time? The question is for Joachim Shelgren to make up that time and get within striking distance. He's got 15 minutes, and if he's several seconds a lap quicker, I reckon in 15 minutes he will have enough time to get up there and potentially take the fight to Andy Boardman here. Two different strategies, same tires, one just newer than the other, and that could be the difference. I think Verstappen is going to be stranded out there on old tires. He may even lose out to Kuzma. Only 3.1 seconds to gap. Verstappen on the dry tire, most everybody else on the wet tire. I saw Grim Lilith bring the 115 down pit lane. I thought maybe they were going to do a Hail Mary play and put wet tires on the car. They have not done that. They are just sitting in the pit lane. They are taking no further part, I would imagine. Kumpu up to third, Boswell down to fourth place. Lang's coming. How far up the field will Tobias Lang get? That is the question, and how quickly can Shelgren run down Boardman? That's your storylines here with 15 minutes to go. Shelgren's got to be careful of that, though, John. It doesn't matter how quick you are if you throw it off the road. How many times have we seen a car dip off into the grass like that, and they end up being sent to the Shadow Realm? Shelgren's quick, but he's got to keep it on the island.
Yeah, you really do have to be careful at the moment, Jesse. Like you say, the grass and curb still retaining a lot of moisture compared to the tarmac on the circuit. And Shelgren, one of the drivers that did elect to take a new set of wets alongside as well, Nico Kumpu. If you looked at his last laps when we had it on the board, he was doing 1 minute 28 as well. So if Boardman's not careful when he slows up too much, Boardman makes a mistake, maybe spins or has a half spin at least, then Kumpu is going to try and capitalize on that one as well. Shelgren already within 7.6 seconds of the leader. Nico Kuzma, finds his way past now Christoph Verstappen. Verstappen, of course, on an old set of beaten dry tires. They're not going to be pretty come the end of the race. He managed it in Donington, if you remember, the 1 hour 30-minute race that we had there. Picked the dry tires at the start and carried them all the way through to the end, even with 2 mandatory stops. Elected to not take tires in either of them. So if the man could do it, you'd expect Christoph Verstappen to be able to do it here today. But of course, we saw him earlier backwards out of turn 8 of Stirling. So very tricky conditions for everybody as Nico Kuzma now sets his sights on to the back of Tobias Lang. And Verstappen's going to be praying more than likely that Kuzma can overtake Lang and, of course, shuffle him down in a championship haul of points as we look to Shelgren now down to 5.2 seconds, Jesse Lee. I think the fight for the lead's going to be on very, very shortly.
It certainly is, and back to the points championship, you're right. Lang has rebounded quite well into the top 5, but Kuzma's right there to take that position away, and if Lang and Verstappen end up 6th and 7th in this race, which you never can tell, can Mikov, Roscom, can they close in on the ailing Verstappen car late into this race? I don't know, but if Lang gets sent back there, then that's going to really complicate this. It's going to be a 3-way fight. It already is basically now a 3-way fight. But if Andy Boardman loses many spots, that's going to actually help Lang and Verstappen in the championship fight. As that was an interesting pass right there. Saw the turn signals on, indicating that they're going to move over and let you through. You don't usually see that with cars like this. Normally that's a back marker style stuff, but there you have it. That's just how tricky this is. Tobias Lang, though, closing in on some of the cars and making the passes, being facilitated quite nicely by some of the other drivers.
think we were seeing Verstappen there, sorry, on Tobias Lang. Tobias Lang off to the right-hand side, and Verstappen somehow sailing around the outside. So not sure what's happened to Tobias Lang, but he's lost a heap of time, and he's coming down the pit lane at the moment, Jesse. I'm wondering if some of these wet tyres are beginning to give up. Of course, if you're double stinting the wets, they've been overheating now for the best part of probably 40 minutes or so, but he's on dry tyres according to the overlay provided by Stewie, as Stan van der Kolen is onto the back now of Aaron Jackson's Mercedes. Ferrari on Mercedes, two very different machineries here, and Phil Roberts just in the background, of course, could capitalize if these guys come together for whatever reason. This could promote Phil Roberts up into P8 as well.
I think that Tobias Lang has had a puncture. That's why he was slow. That's why he was indicating, and that's why he was out of the way. I think that car has had a puncture, and they have had to come down pit lane. Jake Boswell also in the pit lane, the 47 car pitting for tires. Is that also potentially a puncture? And now we see Verstappen off the road again, was looking to maybe fight for that position, but it hasn't come off. Verstappen off into the dirt. They'll give up another spot or two to Roscom as well, and that's a puncture. I'm almost certain this is a puncture. I've been told in chat by Martin Lawrence, who was in this race at the start, that the graphics that we have are desynced, that they're wrong, and Verstappen is on wet tires, and they're quite old, and that would explain exactly what we've seen here with potentially a puncture, as Verstappen should come down pit lane, and he does. Meanwhile, the fight for the lead very much on. Boardman on the old tires trying to nurse it home. It's new wet tires for Shelgren, and it's very little of a fight, if any. Joachim Shelgren for Kaiju Racing has taken the lead with less than 10 minutes to go.
Fantastic driving, of course, from the Swede. The right strategy call in the middle of the race to pick a new set of wets, and it's paid off. He's just sailed past Andy Boardman like Boardman was stood still. And of course, you've got to bear in mind, Nico Kumpu behind is coming along as well for the ride. So we could see McLaren in 1 and 2. Andy Boardman off the road, though. This could be another puncture, Jesse. It could be. Look at the angle of the steering wheel. He's struggling to keep it on the island.
He's gone!
He's spun at Sterling's.
Andy Boardman backwards into Sterling's. A puncture here. He tried to go the distance. He came within 8.5 minutes of making it. The greased weasel car spinning off into Sterling's after a puncture and changing tires. One of the original strategies we heard in the pit lane has turned out to be the correct one. Wet tires and changing them halfway through. Nearly everybody who has tried to stick it out here has blown a tire due to excessive heat. The 475 has been off, I've just seen, and that is Van der Koelen. And oh my goodness, this race has completely turned on its head. It looked like Boardman was going to get himself into the championship conversation, and it's come undone. Though Verstappen and Lang also at the back of the field. And this is Van der Koelen. I saw them go off earlier in the lap through Hawthorne Bend, and they have been off several more times. That car struggling with a puncture as well. Nearly every car that hasn't taken new tires, John Dalton, has suffered a puncture.
Yeah, absolutely so. I mean, looking at Mikov's pit stop time last time by Jesse, 37.2 seconds. And I think Mikov's tire's just gone. Looks very slow, possibly coming out onto the straight. Some weird steering inputs. Roscam behind is on fresh tires, although the amount of speed he's now carrying down the straight, I wouldn't like to say this was a puncture. Just looked a little bit weird as we went on board there, but Mikov is going to be coming perilously close to picking up a puncture, I would say. Roscam behind, 59 seconds down the pit lane. Aaron Jackson, 32 seconds. He's going to be possibly at risk, along with Phil Roberts of 37 seconds. Tom Shipston of 31 seconds as well. And then everybody else behind has done a double stop. So still a few cars dicing with the tire call, should we say, at the moment. And Roscam certainly looks like the quicker car. Roscam could be looking for a top 4 finish today.
The Avant Roscam looking to make the move for 4th. He smells a little bit of blood in the water, so to speak, with Mikov trying to just sort of baby those tires home. 6.5 minutes. It's only 6.5 minutes, but folks, I'm telling you, whenever you're just trying to limp it to the barn, It is the longest 6.5 minutes of your life. And oh, it's a huge slide from Roscom as he's able to save it. He stays out of the back of Mikov, and he stays in the fight for P4. That was a huge slide that likely didn't do the tires any sort of justice or favors here, but it is a save. Kept it out of the dirt, kept it out of the wall, and kept it out of his competitors. Excellent car control from the 96.
Yeah, fantastic car control from Roscam, and definitely proving why he's earning his money today. Meanwhile, we've got Tobias Lang trying to fight back some championship points on Jake Boswell. And of course, look behind, Christopher Streppen is now with them as well. So your two championship leaders.
All these cars with new tires.
On circuit, of course. Yeah, all these cars on new tires. So everybody's on an equal playing field, should we say, with I believe Andy Boardman's way up the road into Druids, and of course you've got the number 8 Ted Edwards just behind him. So this is Boswell looking back on Lang and Verstappen, and what a scary thing to have two championship leaders squabbling behind you while you're at the helm of the field. And like you say, Jesse Lee, you've been out of touch with sim racing for a little while, so you're not quite on the pace as Tobias Lang closes right up to the back of the Kaiju number 47. Jake Boswell's having none of it. He's getting his elbows out. He's getting defensive.
My goodness!
As we see a big wiggle there from Tobias Lang coming out of the Graham Hill bend, and a flashing of the lights for Christoph Verstappen there. Verstappen's trying the outside line, coming on to the back straightaway, but just not enough grip out there. And this is getting very spicy for the final 5 minutes, Jesse.
Yeah, the scariest part for all that was Joachim Shelgren, your leader of the race. These cars are a lap down, and Shelgren was right in front of this. If any of those cars would have put a foot wrong, and trust me, they definitely tried, they may have ended up sliding into Shelgren. Shelgren now far enough away that wouldn't happen, and this move here, Verstappen gets a better run out of that corner on Lang. Lang backs him up, no room down the inside for a pass to be made, and they end up single file again. Verstappen still driving off into the dirt, still trying to maximize off of every corners, has that newfound grip, has that newfound confidence, and is trying to use it. Meanwhile, Lang has got to run around the outside of Jake Boswell. You can make this move work if you pin the car down to the inside, but he hasn't been able to. Just edging back out in front is Jake Boswell, and they end up single file again. Backed up is Lang. Boswell looking down to the inside. Lang looking down to the inside of Paddock Hill. He's going to be a little bit of a touch, and he's going to be able to do it. That sends Boswell out wide. Here comes Verstappen. Lights flashing from Boswell. Unamused by the maneuver made, that allows Verstappen through as well. As they enter and exit Druids, they are in a completely different order than when they started this lap.
Anybody think you've got the fight here for second, third and fourth on your screens, but this is of course the battle for what is essentially P11 overall, as Roscam gets very sideways out of the last turn again, allows Mikov to escape into the distance. Roscam, all you got to do is keep it tidy, because Mikov is on borrowed time with those double stinted wets, and a flash of the lights from Mikov there. I wonder if he's watching the broadcast at all, or whether he just has his push to talk button maybe set to the same as his flasher, as Stan van der Kolen, of course, earlier on we saw him with a puncture. He's managed to find his way back onto the circuit. This is Manzo ahead of him, so they're fighting for what is essentially, I think, P14 overall here, and Stan van der Kolen around the outside into Graham Hill bend. Manzo on the inside just about keeps it out of the rear quarter, and that sees Stan go up to P14 and Manzo down to P15. All the meanwhile, Christoph Verstappen is glued to the back of this McLaren, Jesse.
He certainly is. There's championship points on offer here, and this could be ultimately important. Boardman still leads Lang and Verstappen, who came into this race tied on points, but the problem is it would not be enough points to make it level for Boardman, despite the fact that he's a good 2 to 3 positions in front. So realistically, what you're looking at here are cars that are somewhere inside or vaguely around the top 5 of the championship, getting themselves back in, and these two racing it out amongst themselves, realizing they came in tied, and possibly these two trying to settle who's going to have the best shot to win this championship from the front still. And you wouldn't normally say that from cars running outside the top 10, but it's just been that kind of day. It's been all sorts of crazy, and this is what we have. I have no idea, folks. I had a pretty good handle on what the championship was going to look like prior to all of this craziness, to all of the punctures coming in, but now I don't know. Nico Kumpu, who is in second place in this race, he's third in the championship, or excuse me, fourth in the championship. He's on 184. That will not be enough in my mind to catch him all the way up, but it could be close. Oh, and it's been contact. Contact between Lang and Verstappen. One of them's end up backwards. Verstappen has stopped. Cars streaming by both of them. And what a chaotic race. And it's been chaotic to the last.
Yeah, I think Verstappen just got a much better run through the previous corner, hooked the grass up and managed to get it. Tobias Lang with a little slide, and unfortunately Verstappen just caught the rear wheel as Tobias was sliding, doing the right thing and waiting, although a little bit precarious in the middle of the road in chaos. We got Mikov here, we got Roskam, and we got Manzo. What has happened here, Jesse Lee?
That's Vanderkula.
Mikov's tyre finally let go. Let's have a look. We're riding on board here with Roskam as they come down the Hawthorne straight through Pilgrim's Drop, of course, and up the other side. A flash of the lights from Mikov here as he comes through the fast sweeper.
Oh,
Manzo gets it loose. It's Manzo ahead, gets it loose.
And Vanderkula
spins, and then Mikov comes back across
wait,
the
that's
track.
not Vanderkula.
And yeah, and Roskam just about avoids Mikov. Crazy
I
scenes here, Jesse Lee.
I saw the 475 yellow flagged in that sector. I'm not going senile, I swear to you. I saw the 475, and I think what happened with Vanderkula is they arrived on the scene after that replay ended and had to serpentine their way through it, and that made me think that they were involved in it. They were not involved in it, but they did have to slow up quite heavily to make their way around. Folks, the last lap of the race, and for some, it couldn't come soon enough. For others, it's been a brilliant day. Some are going to lament this race ever happened. Some will try to forget it ever did. But Joachim Shelgren ran a pretty perfect race. The Kaiju racing car has driven its way to the front. They've used strategy, and somehow they're going to come out smelling like a rose in all of this. Joachim Shelgren, what can you say, John?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself there. Played an absolute blinder as he comes across the line to take the checkered flag. Round 6. Winner being Shelgren. Nico Kumpu comes through in a very close second in the end, 4.2 seconds to the good. Meanwhile, the next car down the road, of course, Nico Kuizma in the 777. Tom Shipston ending the race a lap early, checking up before the line. Roskam manages to take the position of Mikov due to some very unfortunate events with Manzo towards the end, and maybe Aaron Jackson might even have a position of Mikov as well, because they're still, of course, racing at this point all the way up to the checker. Aaron Jackson's going to have to get a better run out of Sterling's down towards Clark Curve. I'm wondering if he knows that the McLaren ahead of him is heavily damaged, and if he does, Jimikov goes defensive. Jackson to the outside. He's going to have to take it the long way around through Clark Curve of turn 9. Get on the grunt of the Mercedes. Can he pull alongside? This is neck and neck, Jesse Lee. I think Aaron Jackson just about got the legs. Aaron Jackson to P5, Mikov down to P6, and Phil Roberts just behind in P7. And meanwhile, this man here, Andy Boardman, what a great loss this has been. Qualified so well. Got off to a great start before the wet Pirelli letting him down in the double stint. Of course, the track just not wet enough to keep the tyre cool. Let go, and another trip down pit lane. Andy Boardman salvages a P8. It looks like Manzo's got some damage or a puncture possibly, and he comes across the line to be the last car on the grid. P16. 22 cars started, Jesse Lee, 16 finished. That's a very high, a high out rate, should we say, higher than we would usually see. And it's probably all down to these very tricky mixed conditions tonight.
Well, I'd like to welcome all of you to the 74th Annual Hunger Games. May the odds be ever in your favor. That's kind of what this race felt like to me. It was a survival of the fittest, and a lot of the drivers thought that they could nurse the wet tires all the way home tonight. Almost none of them could. The correct strategy was, as I mentioned, what I had overheard from the paddock early on in the broadcast. The correct decision was to change the wets halfway through the race to avoid punctures. All credit to Phil Roberts on that, by the way, who thought that that would be one of the winning strategies here today. And in fact, he was correct on that. What a win for Shelgren, and what a day for the points championship. Kumpu is going to come from 4th place in the champ to close down the top 2. Verstappen making that pass on Lang on the final lap or so. That has put Verstappen in front of him, but how many points did Andy Boardman close in? Quite a few, but possibly not quite enough. What I'm telling you folks at home is this is now with one round left in the championship. Donington Park next week. This is a 4-way championship fight.
Yeah, of course, all results pending any stewards' inquiries, but it's going to be very close, of course, going in to the last round at Donington Park next Monday. You'll find us here, of course, on RCI TV on the 4th of September. And meanwhile, let's go through the silver standings. This was obviously prior to the round starting today, as the pro split was. So Mike Redford headed up the championship with 271 points, followed by Richard Withell on 230. Just 2 points behind George Barr on 228, and our very own RCI Kevin Boss on 195, who is providing highlights to us tonight. So stick around for those. Martin Foster in fifth with 179. Daniel Durrett tied with Joe Dorber on 145 points apiece. Alex van der Voda on 123. Lee Kettle on 108. And Callum Kerrigan rounds out your top 10 with 99 points. Meanwhile, Keith Withall in 11th with 94 points. Simon Kubaki with 83. Tim Ireland with 81, who you can thank, by the way, for tonight's weather. Trevor Byford on 80. Max Forster on 71. Richard Hutchings on 68, just 1 point behind. Charlotte Robertson with 67. Bushkri on 24. Tom Bryant on 12 in the Rex. Very brave choice. And everybody else has unfortunately signed out of the championship.
Yeah, I didn't know you had a license to park that bus on him, but you sure did there, buddy, with that one. The championship in the silver class has been very interesting to watch. I highly doubt split two was any different than split one tonight. I was watching them practice and it was wet there. They were expecting incredibly mixed conditions, same as ours. I am just curious, were they able to escape the punctures?
Yeah, Split 2 is probably going to be very interesting. We've already got Joe Dorber giving us a slight insight in the YouTube chat saying you may be about to witness some moron in a Jag having to pit for 30 seconds of damage and accidentally fitting dry tyres, which made the last 35 minutes very interesting indeed. 14 cars took the start, of course, for the Split 2. Looks like Daniel Durrett took the pole from George Barr and Callum Kerrigan. Keith Withell in fourth, and Mike Redford all the way down in fifth position. Of course, your championship leader there. So very interesting lay of the land, shall we say, before the green flag dropped. Of course, Joe Dorber in the fantastic golden Jaguar to the right-hand side. Absolutely love that thing. Looks so out of place in today's modern field of machinery. And again, at the back, Alexander van der Voda in the Aston Martin V12, one of my favorite cars in ACC purely for the sound. And of course, the lone Lexus of Charlotte Robertson at the back, still featuring an anime, Jesse Lee.
Yes, indeed. We had an anime in, I think, on Lang's car, or maybe that was the triple two of Zhao in split one. We've got an anime in split two. I love parody after all, and the green flag came out. It looks identical to the conditions of split one as we expected to have, and it's a clean getaway for Daniel Durrett out in first place. Barr and Kerrigan racing each other quite hard for P2, and Kevin Boss has a little bit of contact, slides down to the inside of Paddock Hill Bend, rejoins the racetrack. Oh, and it was a very scary moment there, but somehow everybody able to avoid further incident into Druids here on the first lap. A little bit scarier first turn than we had in split one, but still pretty clean considering. One car off of the racetrack there as Boss makes his way back up through the field, gets two positions back quite quickly indeed. One of them on Joe Dauber as everybody fans out just a little bit. Not fanning out here as they are still 2x2 trying to get it sorted single file.
Yeah, bunching up as they come downwards, essentially the back straight, should we say. Tim Ireland at the back of the queue, ready to size up a move, I'm sure, on anybody that shows him even an inch of an inside gap. Joe Dorber in the Jaguar getting quite sideways there through the fast right-hander. And meanwhile, we have a look at one of the overtakes in the race. This is between the 924 and the number 11, of course, of Charlotte Robertson. BMW goes very wide, of course. Charlotte able to keep the car on the track and coming up the inside line there as well. You know, super tricky conditions, as you said, Jesse. Looks almost like a one-to-one, should we say, of the Split 1 championship. And of course, the Split 2 guys not as experienced, maybe not as with, you know, as much knowledge in these mixed wet conditions as maybe some of the Split 1 drivers have. So could be some very tricky scenes we're about to start witnessing, and everybody still fairly bunched up in the midfield. Alexander van der Voda doing the V12 Aston proud at the helm of the field. Lee Kettle takes an off-road excursion through what is Westfield Bend before he gets to Sheen Curve and finds himself losing a position to Martin Foster as well. Trevor Byford in the Audi, meanwhile, just behind, looking to try and capitalize as well.
Pretty much. what we saw with split one, a lot of incidents just going off of the racetrack. And will we see that continue here? Kevin Boss and Callum Kerrigan racing each other. Boss trying to make his way back up through the field a little bit. Obviously went off in turn one on lap number one, trying to get it done in Druids, and he does. A little bit of sideways action from Callum there, but no contact as far as I can see. Kevin Boss up another spot there for the time being. Had Redford just in front of him as well. I was looking at some of the other fights up there, and this is actually what I was going to mention. Mike Redford trying to make a move here, continuing to work on it, but Keith Whittle doing their level best to stay just in front, riding on board Redford's car for Mike Racing, giving no doubt here, going down to the inside. It's a scary proposition, and Whittle goes off of the racetrack. Here comes Joe Dauber. Dauber in the Jag, up the middle, takes one of those spots away. Redford's able to gain as well. Little argy-bargy racing action there as the other two cars of Kerrigan and Boss join the fray as well.
Yeah, Joe Dormer there with a McLaren all of a sudden in the front of him at Westfield Bend. Instead of going, you know what, I'm going to try and go around Mike Redford, he decides to help him with a friendly bump draft as the pull of the Jaguar there gets him off Graham Hill Bend much better and promotes Joe Dorber up into what would be third position here on Mike Redford. The Jaguar looks surprisingly very stable and very competent in the wet. I'm not sure what's going on here. This is absolute madness, of course. You've got the latest 720S GT3 Evo being passed by what is ancient machinery in comparison, as we still see here. This is Redford coming under fire from Callum Kerrigan behind into Paddock Hill Bend, although it looks like Redford outbraked himself into the back of Joe Dorber. Very unfortunate, and a series of events unfold, and Kevin Boss sails through and says, thank you very much, I will take 4 positions from the lot of you.
Well, I don't know where Kevin Boss keeps his lucky rabbit's foot, but it's someplace where I don't normally get to see. So whatever the case may be, Boss is able to survive that, and by virtue of just not being involved in the Paddock Hill incident, gets promoted nearly up to P3. Eventually got by Callum Kerrigan, and Booskry here having a scary moment as well, and that should allow Trevor Byford through in the Audi, and it does, but Byford loses it into Druids, which gives the spot back to Booskry after contact. Medi unable to anticipate the spin of the car that had just passed them. Absolute chaos there. Glad that that was not different in our split either. Pit stops commencing here. Lord only knows what the strategy call was here, but here's Joe Dauber again, continuing to look strong even after the incident earlier on in turn number one. Still out there making passes, this time on Alexander van der Wood, getting it done. A Jag on old Aston here. It's been a many years since I've seen that.
Yeah, I mean, if you squint almost, you can take yourself back, can't you, to the early days.
It's 2019.
Of the, GT3, it is. 2019, 2018. Who knows? We might even see a GT1 car appear if we go back any further in a little while, as Mike Redford goes up the inside of the V12 Aston onto the straight. A very textbook move there. I can only imagine that Alexander van der Voda did give him the inside line and allowed him the position through. Of course, the Aston Martin, for those of you that don't know, doesn't actually have a diffuser. All the rear downforces generated from the massive rear wing that, of course, hangs off the boot lid. Mike Redford currently on his comeback mission. Of course, big wiggle there from Joe Dauber into Paddock Hill. A flash of the lights from Mike Redford says, I'm getting ever closer. I want this position back. And Joe Dauber goes up high. I'm wondering if this is the time after the pit stops, Jesse. Of course, Joe Dauber did say in our YouTube chat earlier that he selected the wrong tires during a pit stop. He picked a set of dries instead of wet. I wonder if this is that time, because Mike Redford does seem awfully quick in comparison. Callum Kerrigan has caught the back of Kevin Boss. This is lap 19. Boss down to the inside of turn 9, and Callum Kerrigan around the outside does the old up and under switcheroo, gets side by side, and of course gives him the inside line into Paddock Hill. Callum Kerrigan and Kevin Boss, very good friends off the racing circuit as well, always supporting each other in each other's efforts. And up the inside goes Kerrigan, but then Boss finds as well way back, and Kerrigan with a big wiggle through Paddock Hill allows Kevin Boss up the inside into Druids, and the positions remain as they were.
Oh my goodness, excellent battle there for P3, eventually won by Callum Kerrigan, but for how long? I wonder if that battle is indeed settled. Martin Foster here making a move on Byford, or actually Byford just running off of the racetrack there, giving the position to the RPMS driver. And that is a free position, and you'll say thank you very much, and you'll continue on. Byford didn't make it to the wall, of course, just went off the racetrack. And look at that sideways action. How often did we see that in split one? It was in split two as well. Martin there sideways completely. Byford eventually would get disqualified, and I wonder if that had something to do with completely cutting the middle sector of the racetrack. The sim will disqualify you for that. The only other thing I could think of for that for a disqualification would be for tremendous speeding in the pit lane, just absolutely going at it full speed. So one of the two has occurred. I assume it was spearing off before they got to Surtees that caused that. Vanderwoodse and Redford at it again, this time for fourth place. Redford trying to make the pass and looking down to the inside position, not given up, but room just about given for Redford as he completes that move.
Yeah, fantastic move up the inside into turn 8 and had it sealed, done and dusted by the time they got to 9, cleanly driving away from the Aston behind. Just want to say, it looks a tad wetter, I would say, in the split 2 server than maybe the split 1. And I'm noticing a few floodlights on for the split 2 guys. I didn't quite see for split 1 as Callum Carrigan, and Daniel Durrett and Equal Machinery now begin to fight each other through the latter half of the circuit. Elbows out for Callum Carrigan, and Daniel Durrett goes offline. I think Kerrigan there slowed up to allow the position change to go back, which is very honourable of him for split 2 as they round over the hill, and position remains as it was due to contact. But, fantastic to see everybody racing fairly and equally as Mike Redford now sets his sights on to the back of Keith Whittle. Of course, it's Richard Whittle, I believe, who is in the top half of the championship. But Mike Redford manages to get a nose alongside out of Graham Hill Bend down to the next corner again. A little bit of elbows out racing, maybe from the pair of them, squeezed a little bit one way and elbowed the other. And, very tricky to race in these conditions. Even if you are the split 1 guys, of course, split 2, this must have been an absolute nightmare for some of them.
It very well could have been. Closing in on the ending stages of the race, Tim Ireland for the Veggies 141, and car still looks good as ever, able to make a pass here on Daniel Durrett, and Durrett is in 7th place after that spot was taken. I wonder if Durrett was in a little bit of a tight spot there, maybe with the tire choice that looked very odd. We saw that earlier on. Car off in the background there as well. Callum Kerrigan racing up inside of the top 5, trying to do one spot better, trying to get by Vanderwoodse again for another time, potentially the last time. Kerrigan looking around the outside. You can do it. It's a dangerous proposition, but he gets it done before the corner ever comes up. Did Vanderwoodse just allow that to happen, simply knowing that they're running their own race? Time will only tell, but Callum up into 4th place in the Twitch McLaren.
Yeah, of course, it looked like Daniel Durrett slightly off the circuit as well at the end of that clip, so not sure what happened to him, but again, time will tell. George Barr, very slow indeed. I think this is for... I'm very confused right now. George Barr showing in first.
George Barr coming to the line to finish the race and win the split 2 race. What he was doing is he was letting the 2 cars of Dauber and Boss, who were racing each other, to go by, to unlap themselves so that they could continue their battle for one more lap. Now, whether that they appreciated that or not, that's by the by. That is what George Barr did, and Boss and Dauber continue to race it out, apparently.
Very confusing indeed, but yeah, thank you for explaining that one there, Jesse. That makes complete sense. Wondering if Kevin Boss was cursing at that point or being very thankful that he could battle on for another lap after. But yeah, fantastic scenes there from, of course, Split 2. It's great to have, of course, the Split 2 on the broadcast. It's something we don't get to see an awful lot unless the splits do merge, of course, at the end of the championship, and then we get to witness everybody going at each other in one server. Highlights, of course, provided by Kevin Boss, so thank you very much for that. And I believe, Jesse Lee, we have an interview in the form of Shelgren.
We do, and Jakob, we appreciate you waiting for us to finish up the highlights there. Ladies and gentlemen, winner of Split 1, Jakob Shelgren for Kaiju Racing. Not the first Kaiju car to win this season, but Shelgren Talk us through your race and your strategy.
Hello. The strat was yeah, we kind of came to grips with our strat before we did the math. Basically, we noticed that I noticed that I almost lost zero point 0.1 of a millimeter per lap. So I was like, this wet tire isn't gonna make it to the end. So I decided quite early to go half and half fuel and change tires. And yeah, I noticed like 10 minutes in that everyone else was a fair bit slower than me at that point. The game was up, so to speak, and I knew I just had to drive really fast. So, well, yeah, it went quite well.
Was it the strategy all along to come in and change tires, wets to wets like that, or was that a heads up call that you had to make at some point, realizing that okay, this isn't going to work all throughout the race? And also, in addition to that, what are your thoughts on so many cars trying to make it on one set of wets?
So for me, I decided before I went onto the grid that I was changing tires because I noticed that the tires there was no way it was gonna last the full hour. So I decided that quite early. And yeah, I kind of I understand it because usually it is the faster way. But today they lost so much pace and the risk of puncture was so high. So I think it was a bit of a gamble to stay out. Same set of tires. Yeah, worked out for me.
I forgive me for not actually knowing this. Is this your first win in Split One?
For the mini British GT, yes, it is. It's yeah. I've won other things on RCI before, but it's my first in this championship. So
So,
that's
so let
nice.
me. So it is nice. And let me ask you this: did you think it was going to come this way in a
No,
race that had mixed conditions, where you had to everybody's strategy was different, and you had to pick the right one, and you had to race well enough to stay in contact, and it seems like a lot to keep track of, and you won a race like this, one that you will likely never forget, right?
right. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm super stoked about it. But it also felt like it was a bit in the water since I took pole position at Silverstone, and there I selected the wrong strategy and going full tank, and everyone else was doing the opposite. Yeah, it was kind of really nice that it worked out this time, and yeah, I chose the right strat. Yeah, that felt really good.
Finally, just in general, that we've heard other drivers already tell us about their experience. What were the conditions like for you out there?
I felt really good with the setup I had, and yeah, I just had total confidence in the car. And I knew since I was changing tires, I could push the tires to the absolute limit. So I didn't hold anything back, and yeah, the car felt great. Yeah, it was an awesome race all around. I love Brands Hatch. It's an awesome track, and especially in these tricky conditions, it's a nice track. So yeah, it was awesome.
Anybody you want to shout out or thank before we wrap up here?
Definitely the Kaiju lads for keeping up with me and talking strategies in the beginning of the race, and my girlfriend for listening to my driving. For she's in the couch right now. Just yeah, she's staying at yeah, she's putting up with me. So shout out to those, and thank you guys so much for hosting this and having an awesome broadcast. Always
Well,
nice.
we absolutely love doing it, and today's like today make it all the more entertaining. Ladies and gentlemen, your winner here at Brands Hatch in the Midi British GT Championship, Joachim Shelgren. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
John, it was just one of those days. It was a day where you had to have the right pace, you had to have the right strategy, and you had to be there at the right time. Joachim Shelgren was that guy.
Yeah, made a perfect call on his mandatory pit stop, of course, taking a set of tyres. And in the end, it did pay off at one point, running 3 seconds faster than the race leader at the time. And then it all came tumbling down, of course, when the punctures started coming in. Overworked wet tyres in not quite wet conditions meant for a disastrous recipe for some drivers. And of course, as well as Shelgren mentioning, of course, the Kaiju guys and his girlfriend, us here at RCI have a few people to mention as well that we haven't on the broadcast
I thought
yet.
you were going to
And
say we
that
had
is,
a few
of course,
girlfriends.
you might do, Jesse Lee. I don't know. But we do, of course, have a few partners in the form of AK Esports, Driver61.com, Fanatec, Digital Motorsports, and of course, Go Setups. You can find all their links down below, from server hosting to driver coaching to affiliate links and to just some good old fashioned store links where you can pick up some fantastic products as well. Jesse Lee, it's been a fantastic night. I think Championship has been blown wide open, of course, by tonight's very surprise results, not going the way we thought it would. Of course, very unpredictable results at the end, and I don't think either of us would have, committed to Shelgren taking the win overall, especially with, of course, Tobias Lang. Andy Boardman's pace at the beginning was, fantastic to watch, and a right old curveball of a round, meaning we're going into Donington, and I think there's at least three people that could take the honours.
Yeah, three or four people, John. It's absolutely incredible what this race has done to the championship. Nobody throughout this entire season has taken control fully of this thing. We've had many different winners. It's kept us guessing, it's kept the drivers guessing. It's been an absolute delight to watch. The only sad part is next week it will end. It is sad to see it finally go. But the bright side of that cloud is we get to go back to Donington one last time and settle it all.
Yeah, of course, a double header at Donington in this season. An hour 30 last time, and this next week will be an hour sprint race again with a mandatory stop slap bang in the middle somewhere in a 30-minute pit window. We'd like to thank, of course, each and every one of you, whether you've driven the championship, whether you've been lurking in the stream or watching this whole time and interacting with us. We do appreciate you greatly. And if you could drop a subscribe and a like and the bell icon and all that good stuff, and be sure to, of course, check out all of the RCI links down below, including links to social media and discords. And if you do want to get involved, of course, at any point with this championship, you can still sign up and pre-qualify for the final round at Donington. Head on over to racerci.com, and we do as well, of course, have the world tour going on at the moment alongside the final round of Friday's mini roulette championship, which will be with you on RCI TV, of course, this Friday. Next week, September 4th, we, of course, head to the finale for the Mini British GT round before Saturday next week. We'll see round 2 of World Tour commence for 12 hours of Monza. So that's going to be a long old slog. And we hope to have you here alongside us at RCI TV. But from myself, John Dalton, from Jesse Lee alongside me, and of course, Stewie behind the cameras, we'd like to thank you very much for tuning in. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and we will catch you another time on RCI TV.